Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love are told. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story. My name is Adrian Cole, and if you had met me 10 years ago, you would have thought I was the luckiest son alive. Back then, I still believed my mother, Clara, saw me as her world. But life has a way of shifting without warning. It began when she remarried. Her new husband, Leonard, was charming to everyone else, but I could sense his polite distance toward me. He wasn't cruel, just indifferent, like I was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Not long after, my little half-brother, Evan, was born, and that's when I started fading from the picture. At first, I told myself it was normal. Babies demand attention, and I was already in my late teens. But over time, I noticed the small changes. Family dinners became just us three because they thought I was busy with friends. Vacations happened without me because it would be awkward to bring me along with Leonard's side of the family. Holidays were the worst. Evan got matching pajamas with them, while I opened my gifts alone on the couch, smiling through it like it didn't matter. I tried to make it work. I'd still call her on weekends, invite her to lunch, send little gifts when I had the money. I even helped with household bills when Leonard had a slow month at work. But it felt like no matter what I did, I was an extra piece that didn't quite fit in the puzzle they had built together. My calls went unanswered for days sometimes, and when she did respond, it was short and distracted. I started to wonder if she even saw me as part of her life anymore or if I was just an obligation she had to check off her list. There were moments that cut deeper than I let on. Like the time I invited her to see my new apartment. She stayed for only 15 minutes, claiming Evan had soccer practice. Or the Christmas when I brought her a necklace I'd saved for months to buy. She didn't even put it on. She just said, "Oh, that's nice," and placed it on the kitchen counter, where it stayed untouched all night. I drove home in silence, telling myself not to be petty, but the lump in my throat was impossible to swallow. The worst part was how invisible I felt in my own mother's eyes. When Evan got an award at school, she blasted photos across every social platform. When I got promoted at work, not even a text. I didn't want to compare, but how could I not? Each ignored milestone, each missed call, each brushed off conversation chipped away at something inside me. And yet, some stubborn part of me refused to give up. I kept telling myself that maybe I wasn't trying hard enough. Maybe if I showed her that I still valued her, still saw her as my anchor, she might start seeing me again. That's why when Mother's Day came around that year, I decided to go all out. I wasn't going to just buy a card and flowers, I was going to make it personal, something that would remind her of the bond we once had before everything shifted. I booked a table at her favorite brunch spot, the Willow House, a place we used to go when I was a kid. I spent hours picking out a silk scarf in her favorite shade of deep teal and a delicate bracelet with tiny charms that represented memories from my childhood, an open book for the bedtime stories she once read me, a seashell for our old beach trips, a little coffee cup for the Saturday mornings we spent at the cafe when it was just us. But the real gift was the letter. I wrote it by hand, pouring out everything I couldn't seem to say out loud. I told her I loved her, that I missed our closeness, that I wanted to bridge whatever gap had formed between us. I admitted that sometimes I felt like I was watching her life from the outside, but that I was willing to do whatever it took to be part of it again. As I sealed the envelope, I felt a rare kind of hope. Maybe she just needed to be reminded of what we once shared. Maybe this was the moment everything would turn around. I convinced myself that no matter how distant she'd been, no one could ignore the weight of a letter like that. When Mother's Day morning came, I arrived early at the Willow House, my heart thudding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. I watched her walk in with Leonard and Evan, her hair neatly pinned, her smile polite but not warm in the way it used to be. She hugged me quickly, the kind of hug you give an old neighbor rather than your own son. I pushed the sting down and focused on keeping the mood light. We ordered, chatted about Evan's school projects, Leonard's new business venture, and her garden. She didn't ask about my life once. When the food came, I slid the wrapped gifts and envelope across the table. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," I said softly. She smiled briefly, thanked me, and set them aside. I didn't push her to open them right away. I figured she'd want to take her time with the letter. We finished brunch, hugged goodbye, and I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic. I imagined her later that day, unwrapping the scarf, holding the bracelet, maybe even tearing up as she read my letter. I pictured her calling me that night, her voice warm again, telling me she'd been wrong to let the distance grow. But as I was unloading groceries from my car later that evening, I saw something that made my stomach drop. I had to pass by the trash bins behind the Willow house, and there, in a black trash bag that had torn slightly open, was the scarf I'd bought her. The bracelet box was still sealed but crumpled at the corner. And there was the envelope, my handwriting smudged from what looked like water, maybe coffee. I froze, the grocery bag slipping from my hand. The sight of those things, my gifts, my words tossed out like leftovers, hit me harder than I expected. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside. For years I had been telling myself that if I just tried harder, she would notice me again. And now, here was the proof that nothing I did mattered. I knelt down, pulled the bag open, and retrieved everything. My hand shook, but not from anger, at least not yet. It was the kind of hurt that leaves you numb at first, before the heat comes creeping in. I didn't cry. I didn't storm over to her house demanding answers. I just stood there for a long moment, holding the discarded pieces of my effort, feeling something in me finally snap into place. It wasn't just the gifts she had thrown away. It was years of my presence, my love, my attempts to stay connected. And as I walked back to my car, I realized I was done giving her pieces of myself to discard. But I wasn't going to slam the door quietly. If she wanted to treat me like I was invisible, I was going to make sure she saw what it felt like without me having to raise my voice once. And that's when the idea began to take shape. I sat in my car for a long time after finding the gifts in that trash bag, the street lamp above me flickering like it couldn't decide whether to shine or leave me in the dark. My fingers ran over the crumpled scarf box, feeling every dent like a bruise on my own skin. That letter, my words, my raw truth was smeared, the ink running in jagged streaks. It didn't matter that the water had blurred my handwriting. I knew every word by heart because I'd written them with my whole chest. And she had thrown them away without a second thought. As the night pressed in around me, my first instinct was to call her. Not to scream or accuse, but to ask why. But the more I sat there, the more I realized I didn't need to hear her answer. Because whatever excuse she'd give, I didn't mean to, it was a mistake, Leonard threw them away by accident, none of it would change the truth I already knew, she didn't want what I was offering. And that was the moment I decided I wasn't going to beg her to see me anymore. I wasn't going to keep throwing my heart into her hands only to watch it end up in the trash. I was done making it easy for her to overlook me. If she wanted to erase me, she would have to live with the emptiness that came after. But walking away quietly wasn't enough. Not after everything. I wanted her to feel something, confusion, discomfort, the kind of uneasy weight in the chest that makes you replay moments over and over at night. Not to destroy her, but to make her stop and think about what she had done. And that's when the plan clicked into place. The next morning, I called her phone at 8:30 a.m. early enough to catch her before she got too busy, late enough to make her wonder why I wasn't at work yet. She picked up on the second ring. Adrian? Her voice was neutral, almost surprised. I just wanted to check if you found the money, I said calmly, like we were continuing an old conversation. Money? She asked, confused. In the envelope with the letter. I tucked it inside, I said, keeping my tone casual. It was for Evan's school trip. $200 in cash. There was a pause on the other end, the kind of silence where you can almost hear a person's mind racing. Oh, she said slowly. I haven't opened the letter yet. I let the lie sink in, drawing out the moment. Huh. That's strange. I thought for sure you would have read it by now. She muttered something about checking later, but her voice was tighter, clipped at the edges. I could almost picture her looking around the house, realizing the envelope was gone, the gears in her head turning. I hung up before she could ask questions. Then I went about my day as if nothing had happened. By noon, she had called twice. By evening, 6 times. I ignored every single one. And when she sent a text asking if I'd misplaced the envelope somewhere, I didn't reply. The less I said, the more her mind would do the work for me. I wanted her to replay every moment from the day before, to remember the brunch, the gifts she barely looked at, the letter she didn't bother to read, and to wonder how $200 might have been sitting in there this whole time. I didn't need the money back. The money didn't even exist. What I needed was for her to feel the weight of her dismissal, to understand that you can't just discard people without consequences. The next day, I took it further. I sent a short text not to her, but to Leonard, "Let me know when you find the envelope. It's important." No explanation. No mention of money. Just a seed of unease. If there was one thing I knew about Leonard, it was that he hated the idea of being careless with anything valuable, especially if it had to do with Evan. By that afternoon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Calls from her, texts from Leonard, even a voicemail from Evan asking if he'd done something wrong. That one almost cracked me. Evan was just a kid, and none of this was his fault. But I reminded myself this wasn't about punishing him. This was about making my mother look at what she had done, without me having to scream it in her face. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I spent the rest of that week pulling myself out of the web I'd been tangled in for years. I called Leonard's business partner, a man who had occasionally sent work my way, and told him I wouldn't be taking on any more projects linked to their company. I stopped sending birthday cards, stopped making weekend calls, stopped checking their social media for scraps of connection. I took every way she had access to my life and shut the door quietly but firmly. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. For years, I'd been holding on to the hope that if I just tried harder, she'd turn around. But now, I wasn't trying at all. And instead of feeling guilty, I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a bag of bricks for so long I didn't even realize how heavy it was until I set it down. On the 4th day, she finally left a voicemail that wasn't about the envelope. Her voice was strained, a little shaky. "Adrian. I don't know what's going on, but if I've done something to upset you, please call me. I want to talk." It should have felt good to hear her finally acknowledge something, but it didn't. Because I knew she wasn't calling out of pure concern for me, she was calling because the thought of that missing envelope was gnawing at her. I didn't reply. I wanted her to sit with that silence. By the weekend, I stopped counting how many times she'd tried to reach me. My phone log was a wall of her name. And with each unanswered call, I felt a little more certain that I was finally taking my life back. I didn't need her permission to exist. I didn't need her validation to feel like a whole person. But there was one last thing I had to do before I could fully close this chapter. Something that would make sure she remembered this moment not just as a mystery about some missing cash, but as the day she realized she had pushed her son too far. By Sunday morning, I knew she was close to breaking. Her texts had shifted from polite to desperate, her calls no longer spread out but coming in clusters every hour. I could almost feel the tension in their house through the phone. Leonard was irritated, Evan was confused, and my mother was pacing in the kitchen wondering how she could fix something when she didn't even know what she had broken. That was when I decided to leave her one last breadcrumb, not to lead her back to me, but to ensure she'd never forget this silence. I sent her a short text. "Did you check the trash from last Sunday?" No explanation. No emoji. Just those words. It landed exactly how I wanted. Within minutes, she called, her voice sharp with urgency. "Adrian, why would I check the trash? What are you talking about?" I let a beat pass before answering, my tone flat. "If you'd read the letter, you'd know." Her breath caught. "The letter." She stopped herself, then rushed on. "I didn't throw it away, I must have, Adrian, listen, I didn't mean." I cut her off gently, not angrily. "Mom, you didn't mean to. You just did." There was a long silence. I could hear faint background noise, Leonard asking something, Evan's voice from another room. My mother sounded smaller than I'd ever heard her when she finally spoke. Can you just tell me what was in it? I let my answer hang in the air like smoke. Nothing you would have kept. Then I ended the call. That was the last time I spoke to her. In the days that followed, I watched as she tried different ways to get through to me. A letter in my mailbox. An email that started with "I know you're angry" and ended with "please call me." Even a delivery of my favorite coffee beans, something she hadn't bothered with in years. I didn't touch any of it. Not because I wanted to punish her forever, but because I knew if I let her talk her way around it now, she'd smooth over the edges and we'd end up right back where we started, me trying too hard, her not trying at all. Meanwhile, I quietly cut the last threads connecting our worlds. I emailed mutual friends and explained I wouldn't be attending family gatherings. I stopped sending holiday greetings. I asked my landlord to remove her number from my emergency contacts. The more I stepped back, the more space I had to breathe. It was strange how quickly life began to feel different. Without the constant ache of trying to win her attention, I started focusing on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I took on new projects at work. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected. I even booked a solo trip to Lisbon, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because I kept waiting for an invitation to be included in her plans. 2 months later, I heard through a cousin that the missing envelope was still a topic in my mother's house. Leonard had apparently torn apart drawers looking for it. My mother had cried one night, saying she wished she'd paid more attention. That was all I needed to know. The point wasn't to make her miserable, it was to make her remember that love isn't disposable. And in a way, she'd given me an unintentional gift. The moment I saw my scarf, bracelet, and letter in that trash bag was the moment I stopped being the son who waited for scraps. I realized I could define my worth without her recognition. Still, there were moments I thought about calling her, not to forgive, not to explain, but to see if maybe she'd finally understand. But every time, I pictured that brunch table, the way she'd set my gifts aside like they were a bill she didn't want to open, and I knew my silence was still the clearest message I could send. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It isn't shouting, or slamming doors, or writing long speeches about how you've been wronged. Sometimes it's simply removing yourself from the places you aren't valued and letting the absence speak for itself. My mother could fill that space with regret or denial. That was her choice. Mine was to never go back to a table where I had to fight for a seat. And so, on the morning of her birthday months after it all began, I sent one final message: hope you're well. Just remember, people aren't trash. No signature. No further contact. I don't know what she felt when she read it. But I know she won't forget it. And that's enough for me. Moral lesson: some wounds don't heal with apologies, they heal with distance. Love is only real when it's mutual, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away, leaving silence where hurt once lived. In that space, you can rebuild without the weight of those who could not, or would not, hold you close. Life is too short to beg for a place in someone's heart when they've already made room for others and left you standing in the doorway. Hello guys, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories filled with revenge, moral lessons, and love. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found your gift to your own parents in the trash?